Today for this session, what we're going to be is focusing on participating in passionate topics. I'm Francis Benjamin. I'll be presenting, and then with me is Jeff Gramlich, who is going to be moderating and really jumping in and having helping us have a discussion in this, as opposed to me just talking to you on these topics. For this session, what we're going to do is I'm going to break it into three parts. One is why people avoid passionate topics. The next, what does civil discussion look like? So if we're in a passionate topic, what does that civil discussion look like? And then the third part is, as a part of these discussions, oftentimes you're going to have opportunity to where you're the one that is moderating and trying to hold these discussions around topics that can be very passionate. And so how as a moderator, what are the tips for you as a moderator?
We recognize that there's not always a moderator in every passionate discussion, but in formal settings, there can be a moderator. And sometimes you can kind of create a moderator set role in an informal setting as well. But yeah, moderators are very important. If you're a chair of a committee, for example, it's important.
Great. So let's go ahead and jump into the first one, which is why people avoid passionate topics. And what we've done is we've broken this into 5 areas that we're going to talk about this of, what is happening in the conversation, what should the conversation, look like, how do people normally avoid conversations, what can those responses be displayed, or how can you see that in the outward, and then the last is what's kind of that, how do you approach difficult conversations?
So number 3 there is how do people, many of us don't want to be involved in a difficult conversation, and so we avoid that. And then the fourth one is, how do you know if people are avoiding a difficult conversation?
So when we're talking about what is happening in the conversation, I think the picture of the iceberg is really a good one for you to keep in mind, that what is visible on the outside is very small compared to everything else that's going on in the inside. In the visible, it's the words that are spoken in the conversation. I mean, that's what you're hearing. But what's going on inside of people, you have their past experiences. What has brought them to the point of where they're at today, and those past experiences are guiding what they believe, what they feel, what they expect things are going to happen, and so that is affecting the conversation. Also, emotions, your emotions and also their emotions. Those are things that are hidden and aren't always coming to the surface, along with expectations. What do you expect to get out of this conversation versus what do they expect to get out of the conversation, or what will this conversation lead to as expectations?
Sometimes, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but sometimes we expect other people to say things based upon your past experience with them or their culture or wherever they're coming from, and we don't listen, just because we know in our mind we have an expectation of what they're going to say, and instead we sometimes don't. We just tune it out.
That's very good. And then next is this fear of retaliation. If there's a power dynamic there where you're the person that's leading the meeting and they're under you, do they really want to share honestly? Because it might affect their job, or it might affect how how you're going to treat them. And so that retaliation piece is something, or it might be something that they culturally feel that you will retaliate against their culturally, if they express. And getting into that power dynamics ties into that piece also of understand, when you look across around the room, everybody doesn't feel that they're at the same level. as everyone else. People, there are dynamics happen, whether or not whether this is a workplace setting where you have a boss or not. There's always those power dynamics that are there. And the last one is, within the conversation, you might have expectations that we're going to work to get to a final outcome, but there's always a possibility that there's going to be things where closure doesn't happen in the midst of conversations.
And there might be people that expect a closure and other people that don't expect closure, something to happen at the end of it. Some people just say, "Oh, we're just talking here." Other people think, "Oh, we got a goal. We're gonna try to get something done."
Good. Then the next piece in the conversation is, what should happen in the midst of these conversations, and it's important that, first of all, that the conversations are set up so that there's an opportunity to hear from every person about what they believe. You don't want to have a conversation where one person or a couple people dominate the whole conversation, but there needs to the conversations need to be set up so everybody can be heard from. And in the midst of that, part of what it is you're learning about each person and their perspective and where they're coming from. We want to learn what the different perspectives are, because that helps you understand why they are believing what they're believing, why their outcome expectancies are the way they are. So understanding the individuals is critical.
And I would say there, Francis, that's one of the things we'll talk about later, about differences in culture. In some cultures, you want to figure those things out before you start the conversation. Others, you kind of do it during the teamwork, and you learn about the other person. And typically, I think the American approach is to dig in and then learn through it. But sometimes it makes sense to learn about the other people before you get started on a difficult conversation.
That's good. And in the midst of this, we want to understand that everybody should be treated with dignity and value. That we're not in a class system. This is something where everybody has worth, and the conversations need to be ones that reiterates that, and helps people just recognize that dignity and value. And as a part of this conversation, the last thing is we are trying to move toward a common understanding or agreement. Now, will we always get there? Not necessarily. But what you're trying to do in these discussions is better understand why people believe what they believe, the perspectives they're coming from, in order for us to come to this common understanding and agreement.
Right. And that third one is one that I've learned from dealing with you, Francis, that treat everyone with dignity and value. That is that the people in the room are important to you, even though, and sometimes possibly because they're different, and that makes them a unique individual, that we share this planet together with them, and it's valuable that they're here.
Very, very much so. Okay. So, and then if we look at how avoidance can happen, this is 5 different examples that you can see avoidance, where the first ones are the most common that you see in the meeting, where your fight or flight that you talked about. So with fight, what that has to do with is there's something that is going on that someone doesn't agree with, or they're not happy with, and there's this fight where they lash out because they feel personally threatened, and this is the lash out, and normally it's attacking someone in the room, whether it normally not physically, but normally it's vocally in some way. Whereas the other side of it is if it's something that you don't like what's going on, you feel that there's potential for harm, then they'll flight. They'll try to run away. They'll try to avoid the situation and conversations. It's kind of like that, avoiding that elephant in the room at all costs. The next one is this freeze, where you're not quite sure how do you handle the situation. You know it's an awkward situation, and you're going, I don't know what to say that isn't going to make it worse, and so you just kind of freeze in that. The fourth one, fawn, is one that isn't often talked about, but it happens a lot, and the fawn, what that is talking about is if there's a difficult conversation and you think about how you have had previous difficult conversations and what's happened in those. So in other words, maybe you had an interaction with a person, and because you said something a certain way, that triggered that person and they reacted in a very negative process. So fawning would be going out of your way not to trigger a response in order to protect yourself. So if you think about what are the different ways you've seen these triggers happen, then you avoid those from happening. And then, Jeff, did you?
No, go ahead.
And then the last one, this isn't something that happens in the meeting, but happens outside of the meeting, where the flock is, you group together after the meeting to gossip, and it's like, I can't believe he said that, or I can't believe that this is what we talked about, or I can't believe that they didn't let this person talk, or so it's grouping together afterward, when those conversations instead should have happened in the meeting, in order to, rather than avoiding the conversation, it should have been dealt with in the meeting.
And I would point out that in different cultures, these different responses play bigger or lesser roles than in others. I mean, there are cultural effects on this. There's certainly individual effects as well, but there's certain cultures where you just kind of want to avoid that would be the flight, to avoid a conflict almost at all costs, because that's the culture. And it can be a company culture, for example, as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a cross-national culture, or different races, or countries, and those kinds of cultures. It could be ages, and it can be sexes, for example. Males and females deal with things that different cultures, especially in different countries around the world.
Yes. So this is, the normal way you see that avoiding, and then the responses that can often be seen, and this is for you as a moderator, or for someone who is wanting to be part of an active conversation. You might see these things that are displayed that are telling you there's deeper things that are going on, where the avoiding, like Jeff just previously talked about, blaming. This has to do with spending more time blaming or assigning fault than having a conversation. So you're actually blame. I was in a meeting that was talking about ways to avoid in this, and it was two groups that were opposed to each other, and it was, the first group was given an opportunity to talk, but they said they had to frame it in a way that it didn't blame the other group. And then the second group had to talk, and they had to talk about this scenario or the situation, but they weren't allowed to talk in a way that blamed the first group. So in other words, rather than just saying, well, it's their fault, in other words, let's get down to the bottom line of what are the issues that are actually going on. And so that the blaming is very common, where it's just that person's fault, or that group or organization's fault. They're the bad guys.
Sometimes it helps to just focus on the problem, try to identify the problem. What is the problem here? What is the issue? And then get avoid the blame, and that helps a lot, because it often doesn't lead toward a productive outcome.
Yeah. Next one on assumptions, where rather than using the facts, you assume certain things. The one after that, deflect, what this has to do with is maybe there's a difficult thing, but what you do is your reaction or someone else's reaction is they will tell a joke, or they'll joke about something, or they'll focus on something else. So in other words, you ask a question, tell me about this, and they're like, well, what do you think about that football game last night? Or, what do you think about our weather? So they try to change the subject rather than actually talk about the thing that is the topic at hand. And you can see this next one, the indirect, has some similarities to it, where they will talk all the way around the issue, but won't actually talk about or address the issue. So these are different ways that you can see people display their responses as they're avoiding, or blaming this elephant in the room type of a thing. The last one is hyperpositivity, and where you see it manifested is, rather than addressing the issue or the conversation, instead they'll just say, well, it's all going to work out, or let's just smooth things over and it'll solve itself. So rather than actually addressing the issue or addressing the conversation, instead you just put a positive spin on it and then avoid actually addressing it.
So these are all ways that you can tell that participants in a meeting are avoiding the difficult conversation that needs to be had, and or confronting the elephant in the room, if you will. These are the techniques that they use, right?
Yep. Yeah. So this is how you'll see, these are things that if you notice this happening, that tells you there's something else that's going on, and that will help you in your conversation with them or as a moderator.
Right.
So if we talk kind of in wrapping this part up of this approaching these difficult conversations, the first piece is notice and name the elephant in the room. Look for it. If it's going to be a difficult conversation, or one that has potential for a difficult one, think about from a gender perspective, or from a cultural perspective, or just for what's going on, in the lives of different people. Are there certain things that this is going to trigger, this elephant, that they're going to try to avoid rather than address? And that helps you going in the conversation if you have this understanding of kind of the lay of the land and what's happening there. Then from there, think about how you're going to invite curiosity. How are you going to, rather than have people avoid it, help them be curious about how can we solve this issue, or how can we have a conversation that actually is positive and can move things forward, as opposed to why bother, why deal with this? Instead, invite that curiosity of let's be a part of this conversation. And then in the midst of this is, because, and if you think about the fawn example that I used, where people are trying to avoid something that triggers a harm, in that context, they see themselves as a victim in the situation. They're afraid that they're being taken advantage of. And so they're reacting in order to not be taken advantage of. And so part of this is helping people understand that they actually have a choice in the midst of all of these conversations. It's not just that, that I'm in a conversation where it doesn't matter for me to be involved in, because what's going to happen is going to happen. I'm just a victim here. But instead, to help them understand that they have an opportunity to actually have a choice and help in the decision process.
Right. Good. I like that.
So that wraps up that piece. I guess not. We have the cultural differences one. And so this is, as a part of it, is understanding that within this communication, there are a lot of differences that you're going to see between cultures. And within this, we've listed 7 different ones: willingness to voice an opinion, the communication style, the attitude toward conflict, approaches for completing the task, their decision making, attitudes toward disclosure, toward knowledge. And what this has to do with, within different cultures, there's different expectancies in these areas, where it's something that one culture may, there may be an expectancy that only certain people are the ones that make the decisions and other people don't make the decisions. And so, or only certain people are the ones that are supposed to voice an opinion. Or it could be something that is, there's a structural process where if a certain family member is the one that makes the decision and the rest of the family members follow. And so there's an expectancy that I'm not one that voices these things or makes these decisions. This is something that is, my father makes this decision or my mother makes this decision, if it's a patriarchal or a matriarchal society type.
And that can be translated to business in the sense that in the Scandinavian cultures, you'll tend to see majority votes that are taken, and that moves forward. Sometimes in Asian cultures, there'll be more of a like in Japan, it would be more of a consensus approach. In many cases, we're in a top-down organization like a corporation. It might be the boss is sitting there like the dad in the family that Francis was just talking about, and is hearing all of the discussion, and then the boss makes a decision. So those things are very much based upon the culture of the country, the location, and the people that are there. And you could be part of different cultures at the same time. You're going to be part of the business culture, and you can be part of a country culture, different cultures, and you'll find yourself acting differently in those different cultures where you're setting.
Yeah, very much, and understanding that how they communicate is very different. And I was thinking about a former president of WSU was talking about, he'd gone to China and was giving this speech, and where he was at in China while he was giving the speech, everybody in the audience was going this way. They were just shaking their head at him, and it really made him nervous. And he got done and then was talking afterward with the person that had invited him to come over and do the speech. And he goes, "Why didn't they like my speech? They were all shaking their head." And they go, "Oh no, that's how, for us, for our culture, that's how we communicate agreement." And so how agreement is communicated visually is different from culture to culture. And so just don't assume that a certain action means the same thing as what you think it means.
Yes, yeah, the non-verbal things can be completely different, especially with the fingers. Different fingers mean different things in different cultures.
Very much so.
Yeah, and as far as voicing communication styles, another one is in Japan, for instance. It's very difficult. They generally don't use the word no. Even though they might very much oppose your opinion, they will never, or very rarely will they say, "No, we're not going to do that."
Yeah. So a yes doesn't mean the same to everybody. In that same way. You also, as we look through this, like the attitudes toward conflict, different cultures will feel conflict should be worked out openly. There's other cultures that know conflict should be worked out quietly or in writing, as opposed to in person. So if there is a conflict there's different expectancies on how you approach that conflict.